So, I would like to introduce you to someone this morning. Her name is Alexis Spence. Alexis Spence. At 11 years old, her parents bought her her very first smartphone. They thought they were doing what was wise. And they put in place all kinds of parental controls. They also did not allow her to sleep with her phone in her bedroom at night, nor did they allow her to add any social media apps to her phone. And they monitored their daughter's phone very, very closely. Alexis, however, created her first Instagram profile shortly after receiving that phone. Without her parents' knowledge, she circumvented her smartphone's parental controls, which, oh, by the way, parents, kids are very good at doing. And she proceeded to create multiple secret Instagram accounts. And she also hid Instagram on her device by changing the app's icon, which again, parents, is very easy to do. At first, Alexis was ecstatic about Instagram. In November 2013, she wrote in her journal, "On Instagram, I reached 127 followers. Yay!" she exclaims. Let's put it this way. If I was happy and excited for 10 followers, then this is just amazing, she writes. But over the next few months, her mental health plunged, and she began to show signs of depression. Just 5 months, right? Let me say that again, parents. Just 5 months after she opened her Instagram account, at the age of 12, she drew this picture in her journal. Right, there she is, sitting in the corner of her room, crying, with the curtains drawn shut. The words on her laptop read, "Worthless, die, ugly, stupid, kill yourself." And the words on her phone are "stupid, ugly, fat," and some others that I'm not going to mention. Within just 6 months of opening her account, the content that Instagram's algorithm chose for Alexis had morphed from her initial interest in fitness to a constant feed of photos of models, to dieting advice, and pro-anorexia content. In 8th grade, she was hospitalized for anorexia and depression. And until the age of 20, she battled with addiction, eating disorders, and anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts. Alexis is now 21 years old. All right, she has regained control of her life, and she works as an emergency medical technician, though she still struggles with many eating disorders. In June of 2022, the Spence family filed a lawsuit against Meta, the parent company who owns Instagram, alleging that Instagram's design caused the mental and physical harm that Alexis endured. However, social media platforms are protected from lawsuits by our government under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. While Alexis was in and out of hospitals, her parents struggled to keep her away from social media. During one period of separation from her phone, Alexis punched a hole in their wall out of anger from being restricted by her parents of getting on social media. But finally, after a much longer hospital stay with no social media, her mother said Alexis returned to her old sweet self once again. Her mom says that she was a different person. She was kind, she was polite, and we finally had our daughter back. Her mother, Kathleen, went on to say, "Social media has become the silent killer of our children's generation." If Alexis' story doesn't break your heart, man, I don't know what will. It's just one of millions of stories of the mental health crisis that social media is causing in children and adolescents. Back on April 4th of this year, a friend of mine, Dr. Corey Gilbert, who was a professor at Tacoma Falls College while I was there, posted on his Facebook page a must-read book called The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt. And so I went and I bought it. And as I began to read this book and then also watch interviews where the author broke down all the reasons that our youth are struggling with mental illness these days, That's when I decided I needed to do this series called Stop the Scroll. Because in the past, people used to say, oh, there might be a link between smartphones, social media, and mental health, but it's not the cause of it, right? It's nothing to worry about. But now we know differently, right? Especially with what we watched last week, that social media is not just correlated to the mental health crisis in youth, it is the cause of it. And I think parents are finally beginning to realize it as well. Right? And yet, we still have parents buying smartphones for their kindergartners and first graders. And I think it needs to stop. So, what we're going to do today is
welcome to Firing Line.
We're going to watch this 20-minute video that Randy started.
For several years, and I have followed your work for
Watch
many
it.
years. Jonathan Haidt, welcome to Firing Line.
Margaret, what a pleasure.
We've known each other for several years, and I've followed your work for many years. You are out with a brand new book, The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. What is the Great Rewiring?
The Great Rewiring refers to a 5-year period, an extraordinary 5-year period, where the nature of life for adolescents changed radically, more than it ever has. In 2010, adolescents had flip phones. Most did not have high-speed internet. Over the next 5 years, by 2015, most American teens have a smartphone with a front-facing camera, high-speed internet. They have an Instagram account or other social media account, Snapchat, a bunch of other ones. And now in 2015, it's possible to spend almost every waking hour online, and many do. And so my argument in the book is that all of a sudden, boom, in the blink of an eye, childhood became about sitting down and looking at a screen hour after hour, year after year. And that, I believe, is the major reason why rates of mental illness go skyrocketing around 2012, 2013.
In your book and in your talks, you zero in on 3 specific dates. 2007, when the iPhone is introduced, 2010, when the first front-facing camera is introduced to the iPhone, and 2012, when Facebook acquires Instagram.
That's right.
The internet had been around for more than a decade beforehand, and people were using it. So why is it that these developments were so significant?
Yeah, I was born in 1963. I remember the first day someone showed me a web browser. And, it was like God came to earth and said, do you want unlimited knowledge? Here you go. Yeah. It was incredible. Yeah. And all of us adults, we thought, wow, look what it's doing for the world. Look what it's doing for democracy. It's going to knock down dictators. We were all very optimistic about the World Wide Web. In 2009, Twitter invents the retweet button. Facebook copies it with the share button. Facebook puts on the like button. Everybody copies it. And so before then, social media was called social networking systems, SNS. You connect to people. After then, it's called a social media platform. You stand on it to perform at others, and you're desperately fighting for attention. You're trying to be noted. You're trying to go viral. So the millennials were basically through puberty by the time this great rewiring happens. That's why they're okay, I believe. The definition of Gen Z is that they went through puberty on super viral social media, on a smartphone, in their pocket, that was giving them notifications and calling them away from whatever they were doing, calling them away from people, calling them away from their friends. You can see them sitting in a lunchroom next to each other, each on their phone. That is not a way that a human being can grow up. And that all happened between 2010 and 2015.
Why didn't we see this danger coming?
So there are a couple of reasons. A big one is that back then, most of us were still techno-optimists. But what we didn't realize is that by 2012 or so, the technology was not something that taught the kids anything. They don't learn how to program. They don't learn anything about computers. They are, in a sense, the product. They are just being sucked along on a conveyor belt. Their attention, it's almost as though the companies are able to drill down into their brain and extract their attention, and they extract vast, vast quantities of attention from every child. 5 hours a day, the latest Gallup survey, 5 hours a day is what American teenagers spend just on social media, especially TikTok and YouTube. And that's American childhood now.
Why are young people's brains so vulnerable?
Because human childhood is this amazing, unusual childhood in which we have these very large brains. And the brain, it has a certain form when you're a child, But then in puberty, it kind of rewires, it kind of locks down into a configuration, beginning from the back to the front. The prefrontal cortex, and just behind the forehead, is the last part of the brain to myelinate, to sort of lock down into an adult configuration. And it's guided by local inputs. And so all over the world, traditionally, adults would help children make the transition from child to adult, and they would bring them into local knowledge, and they would get them ready to make this role change. We don't do that. Instead, what we do is hand you this device. So this is about the worst thing you can imagine to give kids at the beginning of puberty. And the Great Rewiring radically altered the inputs to children, taking away most of what they used to do, most of their older inputs, including other people, and swapping in screens. And again, we didn't know that that was going to be terrible in 2012. We didn't know it. Now we do.
There's another trend that you write about in the book, which is the shift away from child-based play.
Yes.
What are the consequences of the shift?
So we're mammals. All mammals play. And for human children, the best kind of play is a group, mixed age group out in the neighborhood. They make their own games. They make their own rules. They enforce their own rules. That's how you basically mature for a democratic society. But beginning in the 1980s, we began to get very afraid. We began to get the milk cartons with the missing child. Even though true abduction is very rare, Americans get scared. They begin to clamp down on free play and childhood independence, and they think that they're being good parents by always keeping them supervised. That's the safest thing to do. Well, it is safe in the sense that external harm won't come to them. But as rates of childhood death have gone down and down and down from all causes, they're now going up and up and up from suicide. We're blocking our children's development. So this is the other half of the story, the very sudden and complete replacement of a play-based childhood with the phone-based childhood. And that's why all of a sudden in 2012, Gen Z gets anxious and depressed.
So you write about this paradox that while at the same time parents were becoming wildly overprotective of children in the real world, they were simultaneously allowing their children to do anything online.
That's right. So first, yes, sometimes people accuse me of being hypocritical. Here I am saying we need to give our kids more independence, but I'm saying that we should supervise them more and keep them away from the internet. Well, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, that we have overprotected our children in the real world where they need a lot of varied experience. We've underprotected them online where there are an extraordinary variety of harms and damages waiting that we didn't understand. We thought maybe this was just, they're connecting with their friends online. They have about 500 friends. Isn't that great to have 500 friends? It turns out it's not. It turns out what adolescents need is 1 or 2 or 3, a small group of very close friends, a small gang. That is ideal. That's a lot of fun. And that is developmentally incredibly healthy. So as soon as kids ditched their friends in the real world and had 500 friends online or on a multiplayer video game, they didn't get happier and better connected. They got starved for social connection, depressed, and the natural result is to think about suicide. It's now a normal part of being an American child, especially an American girl. About 30% say that they sometimes or often think about suicide. They have suicidal thoughts. You
talk about this concept of anti-fragility, that children are naturally anti-fragile.
Yeah.
How do these concepts play in?
So there are many things in the world that are fragile, like a glass, and so we don't let toddlers play with a glass because they'll drop it and it will break and nothing good comes from that. And there are a few things in the world that get better when you drop them, and you have to drop them periodically. You have to challenge them. They have to face obstacles. So muscle and bone and the immune system are all anti-fragile. If you take it easy on your muscles, take it easy on your bones, they get weak and brittle. It's a principle of human psychology that we grow by being toughened, and so that's why kids seek out risk. And the possibility of getting hurt is actually part of what makes it beneficial, because then they learn how to face risk and how to not get hurt. And in the 90s, when we said, no more risk, you're not going to do anything that could possibly get you hurt, we blocked that process and our kids began getting more fragile.
Why is the risk and thrill seeking and adventure in the digital space not the same?
Let's look at boys playing video games. So I didn't let my son play Fortnite in 6th grade, but we did let him on in 8th grade when it was COVID. And I'd go in and I'd watch. They're jumping out of planes. They're riding bombs down to earth. They're throwing hatchets at each other. They're shooting. There's teamwork. It all looks like great fun for a boy. But my guess is their hearts never race the way it would in the real world. If you're actually jumping out of a plane, your heart is going like crazy. You're incredibly scared. And then when you do it, you're thrilled. But in a video game, that's just a routine. You do it 100 times a day. So I don't think there's any growth from that. Boys aren't learning any skills that transfer to the real world. Also, the most nutritious part of boys' play is the setting of the rules and the enforcing of them when there's a rule break. And this is, you see boys come together, they yell, they work it out, but they reach a compromise. With a video game, that can't happen. There are no rule violations. The company takes care of all the rule making, all the rule enforcement. So they don't mature the way that they would from actual face-to-face play.
When it comes to the mental health crisis, it's impacting girls far more than it's impacting boys, though it is impacting both. Why has the spread of smartphones and social media led to the surge in depression, self-harm, and suicide amongst girls so dramatically?
So the story for boys and girls is different. Whenever you dig into the correlations, what you find is that the correlation between social media use and depression, anxiety is always higher for girls. And it reaches levels that are pretty substantial, whereas you don't find that for boys. For boys, the correlations are very low. So at first I thought the story was just going to be about girls, that the book was going to be about what has social media done to girls. It took me longer to figure out what happened for boys, but it's a very interesting and very sad story. Boys, it turns out, have been withdrawing from the real world since the 70s and 80s. Boys are less likely to graduate from high school, less likely to go to college, less likely to get master's degrees, PhDs, become doctors, lawyers. Boys are dropping out of society. And a big part of that, we believe, is that the virtual world has gotten so enticing. Boys, adolescent boys, care a lot about sex. They're really motivated to get sex, which is hard, very hard to do. You have to learn all kinds of skills, and it's very scarce to get sex. Oh, but just go online. You have the most amazing, vivid pornography available to you. And, boys love adventure. They love teamwork. They love sports. They love competing. But it's hard to make a team, and there's all kinds of challenges there. Oh, just turn on your Xbox, and you've got a team versus team situation. So we made life easier and easier for boys, which is a terrible thing to do to them. So they don't exert themselves. Boys are not doing the things that would turn them into men.
What does the data tell us about exactly what happens to girls? What happens that is deleterious to their development that then causes depression?
Yeah. So there are many different pathways of harm for girls. The loss of in-person time is the biggest single thing. But then there's also the constant social comparison. Yeah. If you have an 11 or 12-year-old girl on Instagram several hours a day, on TikTok several hours a day, most of what she sees is happy girls living beautiful lives. Is this going to be good for her? Hell no. So kids shouldn't be, of course social comparison is part of being young, but let it be within your small group of friends. Don't let it be among a billion people, many of whom are gorgeous and fake.
You write also, there's a recent growth in diagnosis of gender dysphoria that could also be related in part to social media trends.
Yes.
How do you define gender dysphoria for people who are unfamiliar with the term?
Well, gender dysphoria refers to people who are uncomfortable with their gender because they feel they have a deep internal sense that they're really the sex other than the biological sex that they were born in. It's a real thing. It's great that society is open to people changing, but it has to be done very carefully.
Tell me more.
So there's very important older research by Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, where they looked at they had gigantic health data sets, the Framingham Heart Study, and they were able to see that if one person takes up smoking, their friends are more likely to take up smoking, but actually so are their friends, and even friends. So the things we do spread out through social network. We affect each other. Now it turns out, when you're looking at emotions, girls and women, when this study women, when a woman is depressed, that spreads out to her network, whereas when a man is depressed, it doesn't. Women talk about their feelings. They're more connected in that way. Girls, you're connecting on social media, where it just turns out in many communities, the more anxious and depressed you are, the more you get support. The more extreme your symptoms, the more you get likes and followers. Of course, it's good to destigmatize social mental illness. We don't want people to be ashamed, but boy, is it a terrible idea to valorize it, to tell young people, you know what? The more you have this, the more popular you'll be, the more support you'll get. And so you get this explosion, not just of anxiety. Anxiety is in part, I think, spread sociogenically, it's called, from social causes, not from internal causes. But we get it for dissociative identity disorder, and it seems to be the case for gender dysphoria as well.
And you think that the data demonstrates that it is above and beyond just the phenomenon of coming out and increased awareness?
Yes, because it happens in clusters of girls. It happens in clusters of girls who had no previous gender dysphoria when they were young. So it's very different from the kinds of gender dysphoria cases that we've known about for decades. I mean, it is a real thing. But what happened, especially when girls got YouTube and Instagram early, but then especially TikTok, girls get sucked into these vortices, and they take on each other's purported mental illnesses.
So you write, quote, most parents don't want their children to have a phone-based childhood, but somehow the world has reconfigured itself so that any parent who resists is condemning their children to social isolation. Mm-hmm. What is a parent to do with a child who will be isolated if they're not participating online with their friends?
That's right. So what you're describing is a collective action problem. It's a trap that we're all in. It's a constant struggle over these devices that were created to grab our children's attention and never let go. And so if one person tries to do it, it's very hard. But if we do it even in small groups, it becomes much, much easier. So what I'd say to parents whose kids are already on it, don't give up hope. Don't be despairing. It's hard to solve this on your own. Reach out to the parents of your kids' friends. And I guarantee you, most of them feel as you do. And if you haven't given your kids a smartphone yet, if you've got kids in first, second, third grade, as you do, talk to the parents of your kids' friends and say, we're going to follow that recommendation to have no smartphone until high school. Once we let her out, once she's walking around outside on her own, I'd like her to have a phone. It'll be a flip phone. She can call me, she can text me. Would you do the same? If we all do it together, then our kids won't feel like they're left out.
We have seen evidence, like in the Facebook files, that social media is intentionally designed to be addictive to teens. In January, there were Senate hearings with social media executives about the threats that their products pose to young users, to families. And Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, apologized directly
Sort of.
to the families. That's my question. Have you seen evidence that these companies are actually making changes?
No, I have not. Over and over again, we know from whistleblowers, people have raised concerns within Meta, and they have not been acted on. I've spoken at Meta. I know a bunch of people there. They're good people. They don't want to harm children. But I think the leadership at Meta has always been firm that they will not do anything that will reduce the user base or slow growth. What they will not do, and what must be done, is age limit enforcement. It is completely insane. And here we should get to Congress, because while I can blame the platforms for not enforcing it, it's Congress who basically set them up so that as long as they don't know, they're fine. So we need Congress to fix the problem that they created in the 90s, and then we can get age limits.
You suggest that it's not just raising the age limit, it's enforcing the age limit. What are the major reforms that could happen at a federal level that would be most urgent to protecting children?
By far the most urgent would be for Congress to require the companies to enforce their age limits. The situation we have now is as if Congress said, the drinking age shall be 18, but you know what? It's the parents' job. It's the parents' duty to keep the kids out of bars and casinos and brothels. How can we expect people to check IDs at the entrance?
Right.
Same thing here. Congress mandated in 1998 with the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, at what age can the kid agree to give away data? And Representative Ed Markey, now Senator Markey, came up with a bill, and he said 16. He wasn't sure, but he thought 16 was a reasonable compromise. Lobbyists pushed it down to 13 and gutted enforcement. So the way the law is written, companies like Meta and Snap, as long as they don't know that the child is under 13, then they're not responsible. So the companies are motivated to not know. Congress set us up for this. Not only did they say there'll be no age enforcement, but they said, oh, and by the way, companies can do whatever they want to kids, and they can't be sued. They can show them whatever they want, can't be sued. And that's Section 230, the Communications
That's what I was going
Decency
to ask you.
Act.
Is there, what is the reform to Section 230 that would be relevant in protecting children?
So obviously you couldn't have an internet, you couldn't have social media if they could be sued for defamation every time someone defames somebody. So the original intent was reasonable. Unfortunately, the way it's developed and the way the courts have interpreted it is to say that the companies can't be sued basically for anything, even for the design features that they put in to hook children. And this to me is an outrage that Congress set us up for this. The only other industry that gets blanket protection from responsibility is the gun lobby. So it's insane, it's corrupt. I didn't used to think that Section 230 had to be repealed because it's so important. I now think, after seeing those Senate hearings, I now think it has to be repealed and replaced with something just targeted at the original intent of Section 230, which is a valid concern. But because the situation as we have it now, it's, you know, the digital world is just shredding our kids. There is no age gating. Nobody's responsible. And parents whose kids are hounded to death or you know, buy drugs online, on Snapchat, whatever it is, they have no recourse.
The House overwhelmingly passed legislation this month to ban TikTok or to force a sale of the Chinese-owned app. The bill's future is less certain in the Senate, but President Biden said he'd support it if it makes it to his desk. What impact would banning TikTok have on an anxious generation?
Oh my God, it would be so beneficial. The short form video is the most addictive. It's not stories. It gets them into a zone, a kind of narcotic zone. TikTok is uniquely awful because of the national security risk. The fact that the Chinese Communist Party has access to extraordinary data to micro-target Americans, they know exactly, you know, they know exactly what each American wants. So TikTok is the ultimate collective action problem that exacts a horrible cost from our children and is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, or at least the Communist Party has access to it. No, this is an untenable situation.
The debate over internet regulation is not a new one. In fact, William F. Buckley Jr. on the original firing line hosted a debate right after Congress passed the Communications Decency Act in 1996.
Great. Tell me about it. What did he say?
So I'm going to have you take a look at this exchange between none other than Ariana Huffington and Susan Estrich.
Wow.
About
Blast
the
from
topic
past.
of internet regulation. Take a look.
Okay.
I'm calling for a partnership. I'm calling for a partnership of government, of the industry, and of parents. And the truth, Susan, is that when you have a 12-year-old, as I have a 12-year-old goddaughter, who is an expert in using the internet, she can get anywhere she wants. Right. And unless you are prepared to have somebody there with her the whole time to stop her from doing that, she will, no matter what ground rules you place as a mother. It is completely irresponsible for you to say that it's parents' rights and parents can decide what their children watch. Even the word watch shows that you have no idea what third-wave technology can make available to children.
Ariana, our kids can get in trouble if they choose to, if they want to, whether it's in front of a computer screen or at a friend's house or, you know, at the corner buying drugs.
Wow.
28 years later, who's right? Is it Ariana Huffington, who says we need a whole-of-society approach, or is it Susan Estrich, who says kids will find a way around the safeguards?
Yeah. So Ariana is 100% right. We didn't know what the internet was going to become back then. Estrich's argument is logical, but again, back then we thought the internet was amazing, and yeah, there's some bad neighborhoods, and yeah, the kids need to learn, but you know, it's similar to the real world. What we're finding is that it's not similar to the real world. Now I think it's clear that if there are no restrictions on where kids can go on the internet, other than the parents looking over their shoulder, watching them all the time, then children are going to be on Pornhub. They are going to be able to buy drugs. They are going to be able to do all sorts of things that will lead to incredible levels of suffering, death, sextortion, as we saw in those Senate hearings. So, no, I think now it's clear. Huffington was exactly right.
You say this is a collective action problem, that we need a whole-of-society approach to work together to make a positive difference. And you identify 4 foundational reforms. No smartphones before high school. No social media before 16, phone-free schools, and far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. Yes. Achieving this would require a mass mobilization of our civic culture and of parents. You have a goal to achieve this in 2 years.
Yep.
How do you plan to do this?
Yeah. Now, I don't say we're going to be done in 2 years. What I'm saying is that my goal is that by the end of 2025, our assumptions, our norms about childhood will be different. And it will come to be common sense that you just don't give a smartphone to a kid before high school. Let's just only give our kids flip phones before high school.
You are building a movement.
Yes, we are. We're calling it Free the Anxious Generation because what I'm finding is I don't actually have to change people's minds. I don't have to persuade people that there's a problem. Everyone sees there's a problem. I just have to give them hope that if we act together at the same time, we can actually change things, and we can.
Jonathan Haidt, for your contribution, for your work, thank you for joining me on Firing Line.
Margaret, thanks so much for giving me the time to really lay out the story and talk about it with you.
This past week, my D group started reading through the book of Nehemiah. And in the beginning of Nehemiah hears word of how Jerusalem is still in ruins and destruction in the land of Judea. And it just breaks Nehemiah's heart. It says he sits down and he weeps for days. And this stuff breaks my heart. Because I've seen the way that it's affected my own kids. Jonathan Haidt says there that it needs to become common sense that you don't give a kid a smartphone before high school. You don't let a kid whose brain is not yet fully developed walk around with access to anything and everything in their pocket. And I hope parents are waking up to that idea. That because parents have done that, right? They've given kids a smartphone to walk around with it in their pocket. There is now this huge problem. It's not just in our country, it's worldwide. But there is hope. There is hope if we work together. All right, Jonathan Haidt mentions 4 foundational reforms that are needed in order to change the course of this mental health epidemic. So number 1 is, and I'm going to talk about them backwards because I want to talk about the first one the most, but one of them is more unsupervised play and childhood independence. Right? That's what our kids need the most. They need more unsupervised play and childhood independence. So I want to do a little experiment here this morning. If you're 40 years old or older, raise your hand. All right? All right, good. Now put your hands down. Now, of those of you in that age group, I want you to think of what age was it when your parents started to let you go off and play by yourselves with other friends? Right? At what age were you allowed to start venturing away from your home, whether it was down the road to your neighbors or whatever it may be, right? Got that age in your head? Okay. Now, I want you to all say it out loud together at the same time. Ready? Go. Wow, yeah, exactly. So 5, 6, 7 years old. When I was 7 or 8 years old, my brother and I, as well as some other guys from our neighborhood, used to run up and down the Little Cedar River all day long. I mean, my parents had no clue where we were all day long. Today, the age is 11 or 12, right? And adults like to control how they play. Well, come to find out, it's important to a kid's development to have unsupervised play in order to learn how to govern themselves so that they're able to survive in the real world. So we need more of that, right? More unsupervised play and childhood independence. Another reform that's needed are phone-free schools, right? Which means the moment you walk into the school building in the morning, you lock up your cell phone and you don't get it until you leave at the end of the day. Okay, most schools currently have what they call phone-free classrooms, which Haidt says is practically useless. Because once a student walks outside of the classroom, they're immediately on their phone, and it does nothing to change the entire community. Or they just hide it in their sweatshirts or underneath the desk during class, and they're on their phone. The other problem with that is that there are just as many young teachers and aides who are just as addicted to their phones as the students are. The only way to reverse the tide for the smartphone is to be done away with at schools altogether. A third reform that needs to take place is no social media until age 16, right? Which Haidt actually says is a compromise. He would say that age 18 is much better for health reasons, right? Let your children get well into puberty, right? Past the most vulnerable early years before letting them plug into powerful socializing agents like TikTok and Instagram, which are extremely harmful to those who are under age 16. Okay, opening an account is a major step where youth provide personal data to social media platforms whose algorithms, as we saw last week, are specifically designed to get them hooked. Right? Delay that fateful step well into high school or even into college if you can. And then the fourth one is no smartphones or any smart devices before high school. Right? If you feel like you need to get in touch with your kids, give them a basic flip phone where they can call and text you. This is what Dee Dee and I have chosen to do with our two youngest kids. Because I think we both would agree that we allowed our two older kids to have a smartphone, especially social media, way too early. Right? And we don't want to make that same mistake again. And so our freshman and sophomore in high school, they have one flip phone that they share with each other so they can contact us, and we actually just gave that to them about 5 months ago. But no smartphones before high school. And in order to do that, we have to work together collectively as parents. Because I know the feeling, right? Once a few students get smartphones and social media accounts, the other students put pressure on their parents, putting them into a trap as well. And your kid, begins to hound you. Well, I need to have a smartphone, otherwise I'm going to be left out. And even though we as parents know in the back of our minds that it's not good for them, we give in to them. All right? The phrase, well, everyone's got one, cannot influence you anymore as a parent. Right? Instead, we need to band together as parents and say, not my kid. Not my kid. Right? In fact, let's say that together right now. Right? 1, 2, 3, not my kid. One more time. Not my kid. Because there is strength in numbers. And I think, especially as followers of Christ, we need to lead the way and not following the world. And so I want to introduce you to an organization called Wait Until 8th. All right, I've been following these guys for a few years now. And what it is a group of parents banding together and agreeing for the health and sake of our kids. We agreed together to not get our kids a smartphone until at least the end of 8th grade. So in your bulletins today, and out on the welcome counter is this little postcard with a QR code that you can scan, and it will take you to their pledge page. Or you can go to the waituntil8th.org and look it up there. They also now just started organizing these pledges according to school districts. And so parents sign a pledge when their child is in elementary school that they will not give their child a smartphone until after 8th grade. And then the pledge becomes binding once 10 families in that school in that grade sign the pledge. Which guarantees then that those children will have others to play with and will not they won't feel like they're the only ones left out. So the trap is then broken for those families. And so I cannot encourage you enough. If you are a parent of children under the age of 16, right, we need to do something to reverse this devastating epidemic of mental illness. And the good news is you can. Right, you can change. There is hope, but we're the ones who are going to have to do it. Right, the government isn't currently helping you. The social media platforms certainly aren't going to help you. We have to do it as parents or even grandparents. Right, we have to stand up and say, enough is enough. I'm not going to allow my kid to spiral out of control and become the next victim of mental illness like Alexis Spence. Because some of you are already dealing with this, aren't you? I know you are. All right. Don't try to be your kid's friend. Be their parent. Be their parent. Take the phone away. All right. Take this pledge card and sign the pledge today. Talk to your principal, your superintendent, school board members to try to get phones out of schools. Contact your state representative and senators to start holding social media platforms responsible. And then kick your kid outside and tell them to go climb a tree, for goodness sake. I want to show you one more time the verse I gave you last week. It's Ephesians 5:15-16. God says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity. Why? Because the days are evil. You have the opportunity to make a change. So let's be wise, parents, and take back our kids' childhood and mental health before it's too late. So let me pray. Heavenly Father, God, you care about this more than any of us do. And I realize that some parents simply feel helpless in what to do. But they're not alone. We're a family, right? The body of Christ, and we need to work together for the sake of our kids. So I pray, Father, that you would put a holy discontent in our hearts where we can no longer just sit by and watch our kids go down a dark hole of destruction, but that we would be moved to action, moved to make a change, moved to no longer follow the crowd and the world around us. As I just read this past week in Nehemiah 4:14, that we would stand up and fight for our families, our sons and our daughters, our wives and our homes. So help us, God. Give us wisdom to know the next step we need to take, and then give us the courage to do it, to take that step. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.